We are going to be chatting today about power and politics with Phoebe Saintilan-Stocks. Phoebe is an absolute powerhouse human being. After starting her career working in policy in Canberra, in little stints, Phoebe decided to just casually make the decision to single-handedly launch a media company to challenge the lack of diversity and young female voices in Australian media. Now in its 5th year, that company, Missing Perspectives, has expanded to become one of the most respected, dynamic and exciting youth brands in the country. And then, as if she wasn't busy enough already, Phoebe has brought us this book, The Right Hand, Conversations with the Chiefs of Staff of the World's Most Powerful People. It's featuring conversations with the right hands behind leaders from Jacinda Ardern to Kamala Harris, John Howard, Nelson Mandela, Tony Blair and Julia Gillard. Welcome, Phoebe.
Thank you for having me.
I loved this book so much and I was so excited to be asked to be up here today. So we've got accounts from the corridors of politics, people who are standing behind the most powerful people in the world at some of the most critical junctures in history. So COVID, the Christchurch massacre, we've had some really big events. Before we kick off the conversation, I thought I'd let everyone know that there will be Q&A at the end. So if you can just hold your questions, that would be wonderful. But please keep the questions in your head because I know Phoebe's a fantastic storyteller and she'd be grateful to answer them.
No pressure.
Okay, so to start with, this book was pretty huge. You talked to a lot of people, very high up people, I guess notoriously quite private people who aren't in the public eye. Where did the idea come from and how did it get started?
So I guess growing up, I was always someone who was very drawn to depictions of the chief of staff in pop culture. Like my favourite show growing up was The West Wing. We all loved Liam McGarry. So I loved politics and I loved the drama. And then it wasn't until I moved to Canberra to work for the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that I met my first real chief of staff. And it was a very interesting time to be working in Canberra because we had Scott Morrison as Prime Minister. Very interesting time. And his chief of staff was a man called John Kunkel, which is funny saying his name because he was the second most powerful person in government, but no one knows his name or knows what he looks like. But it was fascinating working as a young woman in Canberra in a team that was working with the Prime Minister's office because we knew whenever John was involved in meetings, important things were happening. And so he was the first real actual chief of staff that I met. And then how the book came about was, as you just said, I run a media company called Missing Perspectives. And one day on Instagram, actually, we got an exciting new follower. And that was Justin Trudeau's longtime chief of staff, Katie Telford. And they, I think at that point, had been working together for over a decade. And so Katie and I jumped on a few calls and we really got to know each other. And it was honestly the way she spoke about Justin that made me realize how unique their relationship is. And like the press have written, Katie and Justin can communicate via eye contact alone. And so that's something I just wanted to explore. And then it might have been naive, but off the back of that, I just cold emailed a bunch of chiefs of staff and they all said yes, which was amazing. But I will say at the time I was having this idea for a book, a massive falling out was taking place in Australia between a chief of staff and a politician, which was Monique Ryan, the independent MP, and her chief of staff, Sally Rugg, and that actually ended up in the federal court, one of the courts. And I think that was an example of a chief of staff principal relationship that spectacularly fell out. Whereas we had Justin Trudeau and Katie Telford who had this amazing relationship. So I wanted to explore what makes or breaks a relationship.
Apologies, I've done it again. For those who don't know, I guess in a quick nutshell, what does a chief of staff do? And do prime ministers or presidents choose their chief of staff, or do you get given one when you get into that position? How does it work?
Yeah, so each president and prime minister chooses their chief of staff because I think, and there's a great scene in The West Wing, of course, that I open the book with where someone's seeking advice as to how to choose your chief of staff and the president kind of says, is he your best friend and is he smarter than you? And that's how you should choose. So a lot of them were friends with that person before. But again, like an interesting theme across all the interviews is should you be friends with your boss, which is a whole separate conversation. Sorry, what was your question?
That was, what do they do? So how do you get the job and what do they do?
So a chief of staff, a quote that I loved was from Bush's chief of staff, who described his job as a javelin catcher, which I think just shows like it's incredibly hard and also not really sure what's involved. Yeah. But a lot of them, like, I guess at the end of the day, you're the trusted confidant to your boss. You have to act as an extension of your boss because you're making a lot of decisions on their behalf. You're also a gatekeeper. But the role that I also loved exploring in the interviews and the book is that you're also like a part therapist and a part parent. And I just loved hearing the stories where they really looked after their boss's emotional and physical well-being as well. Like Julia Gillard's chief of staff, Ben Hubbard, he had to remind her to eat breakfast or she like fainted during some meetings. So he would have to remind her to eat breakfast, to meet with a personal trainer on the weekend. And they're the kind of stories that I loved exploring.
So these are amazing, multifaceted people, I guess, who understand politics, understand power, understand psychology and well-being, and really coach the leader to sort of a new role, which is pretty exciting. And then, as you said, most of us have never heard of them, which is why this is such a cool book, because you get to actually get into the nitty-gritty. So how did you go about, I would imagine these people would not be like knocking down the door to share their story. That's what I would have thought. Was it hard to get them to speak on the record? Was there anyone who said no that you asked?
Funnily enough, the only person who said no was Peter Credlin. But I haven't given up.
Yeah, and that's Tony Abbott's former chief of staff, yeah? Yes.
But the Australian who really got behind the book, they even introduced me to her in case I could get an interview for like a podcast, and I still didn't get a reply, which, yeah, I do want to.
So was it a no or was it a no reply?
It was a no.
Okay.
And then... Yeah, I think I'm asked a lot why I chose the group that I did, and honestly, I reached out to the chiefs of staff to principles that I was genuinely curious about, like Jacinda Ardern, Nelson Mandela. And even like Nelson Mandela, I didn't even realize he had a female chief of staff, and she's in her late 80s now. And she even told me his whole team were women. So I'm going way off topic.
No, that's amazing though.
Yeah.
I did actually think that, because I was like, it's strange. We think of politics and we think of men primarily, but there are quite a few female chief of staff. So it's like an interesting balance, I guess, when you're in the public eye.
Totally.
That main role often goes to a man maybe, but the one pulling the strings.
Yeah, and so Katie Telford, Trudeau's chief of staff, was the first person I got on for the book, and she wanted to do the book because she was saying she kind of wanted to buck the trend of an invisible chief of staff, because she wanted to drive female visibility in the role, because women are underrepresented in the role. So that's actually how I got her on board, because she wanted to be more public. But it was interesting going into the book because obviously their role, I mean, all of them would say, is to be invisible. Like Tony Blair's chief of staff was saying, if he's in the headlines, it's a very bad day. But all of them kind of jumped at the chance to be interviewed. Like, I was very surprised by how engaged they were, and how, like, each of them have played such a big role in promoting the book as well. Like, I was just in Canada with Katie Telford and Justin Trudeau, with the two of them reflecting on their relationship. And I think they were all excited by the chance to share their experience. And I also think tied to that, a lot of them have just stepped out of the role and are wanting to build their own personal brands, maybe. So I totally lucked out. And even down to them reviewing their chapters and seeing what they were and weren't comfortable with, no one really redacted anything, which again surprised me as well. So I think they just wanted to get a lot of their experience on the record and teach people about the chief of staff role and kind of expand the remit of what leadership looks like.
And it's really beautiful, I think, to give that human story. Again, like you said, often when politicians, and especially a chief of staff, when they're in the headlines, it's not a good day. So having a little bit of light shone on them in a positive way to show the depth, the really long-term relationships, the trust, the loyalty that builds up. It's fascinating. I can imagine people would be keen to share it. So, all right, let me get into some nitty-gritty questions.
I'm scared.
Look at my notes. I know. You ready for this? Okay. So the first account in the book comes from Rajanana, which is Jacinda Ardern's chief of staff. So Ardern's leadership, as we just mentioned, she was doing an amazing job and really championed by the media for doing such a great job with COVID, the Christchurch massacre, unfortunately. Did you learn anything about how policymakers respond to these big disasters and crises, and how they navigate those moments through Raj's account?
I think Raj, his chapter on reflecting on his time in his role working with Jacinda, he had been acting in the role when Christchurch happened. And then basically from there got asked to just become the permanent chief of staff. So the cards that he was dealt with Jacinda, they had, as you said, COVID, the White Island volcano. It was just crisis after crisis. And he kind of said to me, he is still in recovery mode. Yeah. So he's truly taking time off to recover because it was such an intense time. I think what it taught, what I loved about exploring the world events, even down to COVID, what it was like for, at the end of the day, humans were sitting in the room being shown the projected death toll for the first time, and what that was like just from the perspective of the people in the room, because I guess we just kind of saw, the 11 a.m. press conferences and the news headlines, but what it was like living through that. And even Iraq, I was really surprised how open Tony Blair's chief of staff Jonathan was, John Howard's chief of staff Arthur here, what it was like the day 9/11 happened. Tony Blair's chief of staff Jonathan said that he had to field a call from Vladimir Putin, kind of being how do we help Bush? Have you guys gotten a hold of Bush? Because he was Putin didn't used to be that bad back then, apparently. So stories like that, but I guess to your question, I learned the speed at which they have to move, and also how different governments can also collaborate. A lot of the chiefs of staff have a network. They're all working together, especially with the COVID pandemic in Ukraine. So yeah, I would say they were the biggest insights, and just that I could never do the job.
And what a trial by fire, not even being in the role, just hey, can you just deal with this? He earned that job.
Yeah. But I think what I loved about talking to all of them, and what really came through in the interviews, is how they were also, to your point, they were able to shed new insights and stories about world events, even the day Princess Diana died, what that was like for Blair's team. Yeah. But they were also able to shed new light on these world leaders who we thought we knew. Yeah. And for me, Nelson Mandela's chief of staff was able, the insights she shared into a leader who we all thought we knew so well and has been so widely reported on. Yeah.
I was going to say, can you tell us a little bit? Tell us more. Tell us a little bit about those.
But she really spoke to the impact that him being in prison for 30 years really had on him, and how they witnessed that so closely. Because he was in prison during the credit card revolution, he totally, he didn't understand the concept of credit cards. So he would carry around a bag of coins, and they would kind of have to say, you're president, we have these credit cards now, so you don't need to carry around coins. And she also said she was joking that he was an incredibly vain person, and it would take him a long time to get to meetings because he'd be looking in the mirror, fixing his hair. So stories like that I just think are so missed in news reporting, and that's what I loved exploring.
And you never imagine that with Nelson Mandela, being vain, really. Yeah. You're not picturing him combing his hair for ages. Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I loved exploring with that.
And she was with him that whole time, wasn't she? She was.
And then obviously a lot of them went on to such fascinating roles. She became ambassador to France, and a lot of them actually became ambassadors. John Howard's chief of staff was Arthur Sinodinos, who went on to become a senator and an ambassador, which is a whole separate fascinating thing in itself, because he was the only chief of staff to become a politician.
Yeah, wow.
And all the others kind of said you can never have that ambition, because it can hinder your role as a chief of staff to a world leader, because you might have vested interests. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. No, that's very fascinating. And tell me a little bit more about Tony Blair, and Jonathan is his chief of staff, because there's some interesting stories. Without giving too much away, you should definitely read the book.
That chapter, I think there's a reason why it's so much longer than all the others, because everything he said, and he's just so desensitized to the things he's lived through. He said, even the day Princess Diana died, he was the one who got the call. And that day, Tony Blair was away on holidays with his family and at a random holiday house in the countryside, and they couldn't get a hold of him. So they had to convince a local policeman to break into the house and wake him up in bed. So Tony Blair has always said that day started off so badly from the outset. Just being woken up by a random local policeman.
That's a brave local policeman, though, because what if it was a prank?
Yeah. And then Jonathan, as chief of staff, also had a very rocky relationship with the Queen. Because what's fascinating about the UK chief of staff is that you also have to manage this bizarre relationship with like this third institution. So Jonathan and the Queen hated each other. And he actually shared this story of he was at a dinner with Bush and the Queen and Blair, and something must have happened between Jonathan and the Queen. And when the Queen left, or when Jonathan left, Bush turned to Blair and was like, what's up with Jonathan and the Queen? Like, do they hate each other or something? And then, final story about Blair, then we can move on. Jonathan, Blair's chief of staff, was at Balmoral for a weekend, and he was like, I always hated going there, it was terrible. But one weekend he brought his girlfriend and for the weekend, and the Queen found out that Jonathan had brought his girlfriend and that they weren't married. And an advisor actually pulled Jonathan aside and was like, you guys have to go home because the Queen doesn't want to set a bad example for Camilla and Charles.
Oh my God.
So just stories like that. And he just said it in a very blasé way. Yeah, Queen and I hated each other. Yeah. But even his stories around Northern Ireland, and he had to have like a bomb detector strapped to his car at all times. And like they were really at risk during that time. And Jonathan was kind of, he took on this new role in a way of being the lead negotiator during that time and went on to become a diplomat. So yeah, so I could talk about this all day.
No, I love it. I think that's absolutely fascinating because again, so many of us see the outside and it, you know, I think especially the royal family, that whole relationship, and it was explored a tiny bit in The Crown as well and other shows, but yeah, it is a really fraught one because you're in politics, but then you also have to answer to someone else.
Yeah. And he also spoke about after Princess Diana died, the role that he played with Blair in kind of navigating this very grieving and conflicted royal family. And so, one final story about Jonathan and Blair. Jonathan and Tony were in a Florida restaurant, and this American couple came up to them and goes to Blair, you were so great in the movie The Queen. I'm just giving away all of the book. Please still buy it.
There's a lot more. You also spoke to Sheila Nix, who was right hand to Dr. Jill Biden, and also US Vice President Kamala Harris.
And Bono.
Yes.
Anyway.
That is really and was her official title right hand person to Bono? Was that?
Right hand to Bono, yeah.
Wow.
Her career path is crazy.
Yeah, that would be my LinkedIn title forever, I think. Right hand to Bono. And so obviously she went through the loss of the US election to Trump. Is there any insights she could share on what that must have felt like?
So what was really interesting about Kamala Harris's chief of staff, Sheila, was that, as you said, she had worked in the Biden camp before and was such close friends with Jill and, keep forgetting his actual name, Joe.
Yeah, Joe. Yeah. Were you going to call him Sleepy Joe? I was going
to. But because she had that long-standing relationship with the Biden family, she was actually very candid in the book around what that was like when Biden wouldn't step down when she was working at that time for Kamala Harris. Yeah. And she spoke about how complicated that time was for her personally because she was so loyal to the Biden family, which she spoke so highly of, and you know what she had learned from them. But at the end of the day, she was chief of staff to Kamala Harris, and they had, I think at that point, 107 days to launch an entire campaign. So hearing her reflections on that time when Biden wouldn't step down were fascinating, but also what is involved in a presidential campaign. Hearing her talk about what debate camps are like how they prep for that they bring in, you know, there are people whose job is to prep leaders for presidential debates. Fun job. And then obviously she was with Kamala the night that the results came in, and she kind of said like they were genuinely expecting to win. So it was a massive shock for them. And then I think Sheila was saying her son was getting married the next weekend, so they kind of had to go through that immense loss and then kind of pick herself back up again and keep going and pick Kamala back up and keep her going because she's continued working with Kamala. Yeah. So yeah, just how cutthroat American politics really is. Yeah.
And how do you do that? How do you pick yourself up after such a, you know, public loss?
Well, she was saying the week the week that I interviewed Sheila, the huge protests were taking place across the country, and she was saying that what gives her hope now is the next generation and the resistance and the protests that are still taking place across the country. But yeah, absolutely. I also, this killed me, but I also interviewed Michelle Obama's longtime chief of staff, but she's actually not in the book. She's in the podcast, which is coming out later this year. But she'd been working with Michelle Obama, I think, for 25 years now. Like, she was Michelle's chief of staff when Michelle was working in a hospital, like way before Obama's campaign. But hearing her talk about what the loss was like for the Obama team and like having to physically do the handover with Trump's team coming in and how heartbreaking that is. But this is just me yapping with the microphone.
No, I love it. No, this is wonderful.
What all of the chiefs said who have worked with Trump, particularly the Trudeau team, is that his second term has been a lot scarier to witness because they all kind of said the first term, he just didn't have a plan. Like when Trudeau's team came in the second week, the Trump team were in office, they had to explain to Trump's team what the first 100 days are because they just never heard of that term. But all of them But all of them kind of said Trump's second term, he's come in with a big plan. He's got different group of people around him, and that's been scarier for a lot of them to witness.
Did you reach out to Trump's chief of staff?
No. So she got appointed, I think, after I'd written the book.
Okay,
for context, Trump in his second term has hired the White House's first ever female chief of staff, Susie Wiles. So she would actually be fascinating to interview.
Yeah, maybe for the podcast.
Book 2. But also asking her how her role kind of coexisted with Elon Musk when he was kind of a de facto chief of staff as well.
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
It's fascinating. And so with a lot of the different stories, we've seen some chief of staffs and leaders who are very close, like Justin Trudeau and Katie. And then, we've seen Dr. Monique Ryan and Sally Rugg, who, were in court for not being close and falling out. Do you think that does it always work if they're best friends, as you sort of said earlier, or are there any chief of staffs who work really, really well with a leader and they're not friends and they actually keep it really professional?
So, I haven't announced this yet, but I'm working on a second book at the moment, which is exploring, as in this is linked to your question, but it's exploring chiefs of staff to leaders beyond politics. So kind of like the chiefs of staff to like Zuckerberg and people who hold like cultural capital. And I interviewed Harry and Meghan's longtime chief of staff. Wow. And it was funny because we literally had this conversation last week. And he said that he's the longest serving member of their team. He's been working with Harry for 15 years. And he's like, that is because they are not my friend. He's like, I've never invited them to a family event. We have done nothing personal. And that is why I am still here. So I think that goes to the point, like a lot of them, there were kind of like two camps of people in the book, the right hand, the people who thought you should be friends with your boss and those who don't believe in that. And Tony Blair and Jonathan Powell, they've been working together for like 15 years now. And like Jonathan wears Blair's hand-me-down clothes. And it's just kind of endearing in a way because they're these two middle-aged men who insist that they're not friends, but I'm like, you are friends.
You spend all your waking hours together, basically.
And they were getting dinner the night I was interviewing Jonathan. But Jonathan kind of said you cannot be friends with your boss because if you're friends, it's hard to have those difficult conversations. And a lot of them were kind of saying it's hard. It's harder to challenge your boss when that boundary isn't there. Whereas a lot of the others like Katie and Justin, they kind of say that friendship is needed to be able to have those. So we're kind of like these two schools of thought. And I interviewed John Howard's chief of staff, Arthur Sinodinos, the week that Biden was refusing to step down. And there was a lot of speculation. And Arthur was kind of like, maybe he just has this group of people who are yes men and are so loyal to Biden that they just can't have that difficult conversation where you should just say, hey, I think it's time.
Yeah. Would you say a common thread in a successful chief of staff is that whether they're friends or not, they can call someone out on their bullshit? Like
totally.
They can,
Like all of them kind of said, one of the biggest roles of the chief of staff is to also deliver the bad news as well. And Obama's chief of staff has a story where he kind of said whenever he would get a piece of good news, he'd be like, yes, finally some good news, and would walk down to the Oval Office and tell Obama. And Obama would say, someone's already told me. So your whole job, in a way, like there's always going to be the people to tell your boss the good news, but their whole job is to kind of have that difficult conversation. And the bad news as well. And that's why Gillard's chief of staff, Ben, and Jacinda Ardern's chief of staff, Raj, who two men working for female leaders, they kind of said a massive part of their job was to also be reading what was being written in the press about their boss, like so much misogyny and sexism in the press, and have to have that conversation with your boss. And Ben Hubbard, particularly because Gillard was the first female prime minister. Obviously, New Zealand had had two before Ardern. But he was like also them trying to figure out what should we comment on, what shouldn't we comment on. Because he was saying Gillard was leader before the Me Too movement, where it was a lot more common to call that kind of stuff out. Yes. So he said a lot of the time they just refused, even when Alan Jones was saying everything Alan Jones was saying. But that he also regrets now not calling it out. Yeah,
but you end, without giving away any spoilers, you end the book talking about Ben's recount of Julia Gillard's misogynist speech. Yes. Was there anything you learnt from behind the scenes that you can share without giving everything away?
It was just that the speech was truly on a whim. Was it? Yeah, and she kind of went, Abbott had kind of said what he said, and then Gillard kind of went over to a team and was like, I think I'm going to do this speech. And then Ben was like, is this a good idea? Like, because they were really worried about playing the gender card. Yeah. And Gillard just decided to go for it. And now he's like, I was telling him the speech is now having a renaissance on TikTok with the Gen Zs. Yeah,
it's sort of living on forever and still relevant. Yeah.
So hearing from his team was like for them, and just seeing the impact that it's had. Yeah, was great.
Oh, amazing. And we're now, obviously, a lot has happened, and I know you're still interviewing chief of staff, but we're in a more divided world than ever these days, unfortunately. Has having this sort of understanding and this insight that you have into the chief of staff role and into, I guess, the more invisible layers of power within politics, has it given you any insights into how we could make the world a bit less divisive and fix things? How are we going to fix the world?
That's a big question. Yeah. So I would say I worked on the book for around 3 years. So it was originally going to be a podcast series, and then it kind of took on the life of its own and became a book. But because of that, I'd been working on it for quite a long time. And during that time, we saw Trump come back. And I mean, as you said, the social fabric kind of unraveling a bit, understatement, with World War III right now. Yeah. But the last two interviews I did for the book just happened to be Sanna Marin, the Finnish Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who was a really young woman, because Sanna Marin herself was, I think, 34 when she became Prime Minister, and Nelson Mandela's Chief of Staff, so kind of like the oldest and the youngest. Yeah. And I asked them both what keeps them optimistic. And I also, sorry to answer, both of them kind of said it's the next generation. Yes. And that kind of is why I also wanted the end of the book to be a call to action for people to consider roles like that and to kind of, I mean, as I said before, expand the remit of what leadership can look like. Like it's not always the people on the podium. People can have the same amount of power just in the wings. Yeah. But I also spoke to Mandela's Chief of Staff. I was so naive. I was like to her, the times we're living in, things are getting tough. What keeps you optimistic? And she's like, Phoebe, we've been through far worse. As someone who worked for Nelson Mandela. Yes. And she kind of said to her, current affairs and history have kind of come in waves, and we've seen forces push against these democratic institutions. But she said at the end of the day, it's about the people, having good people in those institutions. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people can disagree, but I thought that was a great sentiment. And that's why I kind of finished the book. I also love a happy ending. Yeah. So I'm like, have it as a call to action in getting a lot more people interested in the behind the scenes roles, but also making sure there are great people in those institutions as well. Yeah.
And also just giving people an insight and understanding, because we need to understand how the world works if we might want to one day change the world. It's just breaking down some of the smoke and mirrors, I think, that goes into controlling the countries around us. So yeah, it's very cool. I know we've touched on a lot of stories. Were there any stories that were too controversial to publish?
Too controversial.
Yeah. Or that got redacted in the edit?
Yeah. As in, there was only one, but I think I'm genuinely not able to.
Yeah. Okay, but there was one.
Yeah. The top level is like there's one world leader that I think is still navigating an inquiry.
Okay.
So a lot of it had to be cut out on that particular world event.
Okay.
Very vague.
All right.
But yeah, there was only one example.
Yeah.
Other than that, the really funny one is Oasis had announced their world tour the week that I interviewed Tony Blair's chief of staff. Yeah. And obviously, there's a really famous photo where Blair invited Oasis into 10 Downing Street. Yeah. And the press got this amazing photo of Oasis walking in. So it kind of like would hit the press every time something was going wrong in the UK. They'd be like, Oasis need to get back in there. But I had asked Jonathan Powell, did you get tickets to Oasis? And he said no. And then he wanted that redacted from the transcript.
I probably would too.
Didn't want people knowing he'd missed out.
Yeah, I understand that. I relate.
I get that.
One fact that people here may or may not know is that you actually wrote most of the book in Wagstaffe.
Yeah, I did. So my in-laws have a place literally up the road, so I had to walk down the hill to get here today. So a lot of it was written in Hardy's Bay at the amazing cafe across the road, and then on Wagstaffe Avenue.
So cool. And give yourselves all a hand for that. Inspiring the book.
Don't know if I get a clap for that. But I was saying before I even read the Talking Turkey, the local newsletter.
It's always a nice escape sometimes when you're writing about heavy world events to look out and be like, oh, there are nice people.
Totally. And I also understand why so many authors write in Wagstaffe. Like I think Charlotte Wood also wrote a lot of her books up here. It's an amazing community. Yeah,
it's a very creative place. So obviously you're very busy and you've touched on a second book, but what is next? Tell us a bit more about the podcast and Missing Perspectives. What's happening next?
So I'm assuming I'm allowed to say. We've got a podcast coming out for the Right Hand with Penguin. So they're going to be leading that. Penguin people in the front row.
We got the thumbs up.
Yeah, and then a producer has the docuseries rights. So we're talking to a couple of streamers at the moment. So yeah, it'll probably be focusing on podcast and the docuseries, which I think will enable it to bring like this whole other dimension to the story.
Amazing. And have you stayed, obviously, I know that you were recently in Canada and you were hanging out with Katie, the chief of staff to Justin. I'm killing everyone by their first names, but like we're all hanging out all the time. Yeah, just hanging out. But have you stayed in touch with the chief of staffs, and are you finding that they're are they happy now that their stories are being heard?
Yeah, so it's been fun. So when I was in Canada, I got to do press with Katie Telford. Trudeau actually joined us on stage for the events, which was amazing. He also spoke about Katy Perry.
Yes. The other Katie.
Just saying. Yeah. He calls her Catherine. And Katie and Justin will actually be coming to Australia next month, which is really exciting. So hoping to do some book stuff then. But yeah, we've got a panel coming up in Melbourne that we're hoping to have Jacinda's chief of staff on, Gillard's, and Katie Telford, Trudeau's chief of staff, because it's amazing having three of them on a panel. Yes. Like in Washington, I had one with the chiefs of staff to Trudeau, Sanna Marin, and Kamala Harris. Yes. And hearing the three of them, meet for the first time for a lot of them. Yeah. They might not have met in person. And just reflect on their experiences together and how they were similar and different was fascinating. So yeah, I'm excited to do one here. Yeah. And yeah, they've all just been massive supporters of the book.
Oh, I love that. Have you seen the shift in social media? I know Trump's chief of staff is a little bit active on Truth Social and other platforms. Do you think, obviously your book's contributing to this, but do you think we're generally seeing a little bit more of a public role for the chief of staff? Like they're getting their own profile. Sure. You touched on this before, them sort of getting their own profiles as well.
And I think what was unprecedented was Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, doing an interview with Vanity Fair, which obviously got a lot of backlash, and I'm not really sure why they did it. Yeah. But it was interesting that they made that decision to put his inner circle kind of in front of the public and kind of share who they are, what they're doing. But I would also say it's been interesting seeing Mam Dani in New York, his chief of staff. She's a young woman doing a lot of interviews and very much building out her personal brand. So I also wonder if it's also the next generation of chiefs of staff coming up who will be very public and kind of come up against that traditional notion of the invisible chief of staff.
And then that might change the roles that they take on. Like you said, they've famously not really been politicians afterwards, but maybe that's shifting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how does one become a chief of staff? I know we've got a bit of a call to action in the book to get next generations engaged.
A lot of them, I mean, all of their careers were so varied. Like, there is no real linear path to becoming a chief of staff, but it's been interesting seeing how each of them came into the orbit of their boss. Like, Raj was cold emailing Obama's team and then got into the Obama sphere, and then that's where he met Jacinda Ardern because she was like a rock star coming up through this new political movement. And a lot of them were just friends, like Ben Hubbard and Julia Gillard. He worked for Julia Gillard when she was John Brumby's chief of staff. So yeah, a combination of just chance, and a lot of them were friends. So
and most of them have been in the politics sphere.
Most of them have been political hacks, but yet some weren't. Yeah, I'm like, there is no real path. Because I kind of went into it asking all of them, what did you study at university? Like, is that the trick? And they were like, all study different things. Some were economists, some were in politics. So yeah, super varied, which isn't helpful for anyone.
No, but I think it is in a way, because I guess there's an option. And did you come away from the book, writing the book, having all these interviews, feeling like these people are actually more powerful than the people in power, or is it a partnership?
Yeah, and I think what came through in the interviews is that at the end of the day, they really are gatekeepers. And it was funny because the book was originally going to be called The Gatekeepers, but every chief of staff was like, I hate that term. And again, like, it's also a bit problematic in a way. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's their job. Like, they have to vet people. They have to prioritize who gets access to their boss and protect their time and well-being. And I think their role of being a gatekeeper at the end of the day is why they're so powerful.
Yes. Did you find that all of the chief of staffs were politically and I guess values aligned with their president or their prime minister that they worked with?
I think so.
Because that would be challenging.
An interesting example of where they weren't was John Howard's chief of staff, Arthur. Spoke about how, I didn't realise this, Arthur Sinodinos is the son of migrants. He grew up in Newcastle. And he said, this really surprised me because he was really candid. He spoke about how he really did clash with Howard on issues relating to multiculturalism. And he said, like, he tried really hard to kind of rein Howard in and bring him more to the left. But he was like, at the end of the day, Howard had his view and the policies he wanted to bring to life. And you have to remember, as a chief of staff, that you're not the elected official. Yeah. But even like, I interviewed Gloria Steinem's longtime right hand, and she was saying over 40 years of working with Gloria, their views on feminism have started diverging. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting exploring relationships where they do start diverging, but yeah.
And when you work together for that long, I suppose it makes sense. I mean, there comes a point when things do diverge.
Yeah.
Are we ready for some questions?
We're just yapping on
People, I know we could talk for hours.
We are ready for questions.
All right.
So can I have the first question?
Of course.
Did you show them their chapters before you published?
Yeah, so we let them read it, but by the time we'd written the chapter, they weren't really able to change. And yeah.
Did anyone want to?
Did anyone want to? Weirdly.
Except for the Oasis tickets.
Except that must have really cut him deep.
Okay, questions. Here we go.
As a former journalist, I want to ask you, how candid do you really think the chiefs of staff were with you? Because I see them as masters of spin, all about public facade and PR. So would they really answer truthfully if you asked them an in-depth question about the most difficult times or the most difficult decisions?
I think, yeah, they were more candid than I thought they would be, because I kind of went in with that mindset that there would be a lot of spin. But I think it surprised me how lack of spin there was. The only thing that's interesting was I actually didn't realise this until I was on Antoinette Latouffe's podcast. And she had Control F'd this is why I'm like, she's such a good journalist. She control-F'd the word sorry in the book and tried to find out like who apologised more than others. Okay. And she said that Arthur, Sinodinos and Howard, like that chapter, the way he approached talking about the Iraq War, he had no regrets. He didn't apologise for anything. Whereas Jonathan Powell and Tony Blair, Jonathan really did express regret over decisions made. And, you know, allegations of sofa government and informal record keeping. And I think that comes down to the fact that Arthur did go on to become a politician. So maybe that is why he
has a spin still.
Yeah. So that's probably the only chapter. But again, I would say Sinodinos was probably more candid than I thought he would be. Like, I definitely went into it thinking they would spin. I'm trying to think if there were any sections. Like, I'd have to go back. But Arthur's the only one that really does come to mind. I mean, all of them really try to cement their leaguer's legacy as well, especially the ones who are still working with them. And I think that's why it's important to, as I did in the book, I wrote an intro for each person, kind of reflecting on what was happening to kind of ground it in the reality and facts, and the criticism of their boss. Yeah. But yeah, nothing off the top of my head. But I mean, read the book and you can make up your
I suppose they're experts as well on having a message to put out.
Yeah, totally.
But that doesn't mean it's not true.
But I also think the leaders like chose deliberately. I mean, none of them, probably Tony Blair, none of them were particularly controversial. Actually, that's a lie. John Howard's controversial. Yeah. Ignore me.
I think every leader's a bit controversial in some way. Do we have any other questions?
Any other questions?
I imagine to be a chief of staff, you need to know your leader's strengths and weaknesses really well. It also would help, I think, if the chief of staff had a strength where the leader was had a weakness. Was that a trend that you saw in the book?
Absolutely, and I think a really good example was Jacinda Ardern and her chief of staff, Raj. I always tell everyone I went into the interview really expecting Raj to be exactly how you would imagine Jacinda, but he was polar opposite. Like, I could not imagine someone more different to her. And I think he kind of said, like, he described them as yin and yang, like they're completely different personalities. And he said that's why their relationship works so well. Same with Katie and Justin. And when I did the interview with Katie and Justin Trudeau reflecting on why he chose Katie was because she was the complete opposite of who he is. Yeah. And she thinks so differently and they have completely different personalities. And again, like, I wonder if Sally Rogge and Monique Ryan were very similar, and maybe that's why, having never spoken to either of them,
why there was a clash. So when you say Raj was a complete opposite of Jacinda, is he a bit harder because she's quite warm and soft? Yeah.
He's like not unfriendly, but like very introverted and firm, and like isn't overly charismatic or like he's very much like a political operator. And he spoke a lot about having to rein her in and keep her focused. So, yeah, I think you just can't surround yourself with people who are exactly the same as you.
And maybe similar with Justin, because Justin's also very charismatic. That's what he's famous for. Totally. And with Katie, a bit more measured.
And even Mandela's team. Like, she was saying we, the whole time, just had to kind of keep him. Yeah.
Can we have a mic over here?
Thank you. I'm really interested in Angela Merkel. She was a very famous German chancellor who seemed to have a head about her and was able to manage all the idiots around her a lot of the time, you know. And the change that's happening in Germany now with such a change in the far right and the Nazis, and how strong she was about the refugees coming in from Syria, and how strong she was about the Nazi apologists, what had happened in her country. And I just wondered if you got any chance to speak with her chief of staff.
I tried really hard to get her chief of staff. The issue was that he is now a politician, so it was really hard to access him. But a lot of the chiefs of staff kind of said they asked him for advice around how to be a good chief of staff. And he told, I can't remember who it was, but he was like, you need to buy a sleeping bag and have it in the office. Because it's like, you're not going home. But when I did the event with Trudeau, when we were talking after, I was kind of like, who's the best world leader? Like, who were you friends with? And he was saying she was amazing. Yeah.
That's, very cool. I think up the back.
Shouldn't have worn Tivas on stage.
Oh no, they're great.
Hey,
Very
thanks for that. It's been so fascinating. I think it's really interesting that one of the few voices you couldn't get was Peter Credlin, because she was such a visible influence at the time, and there was so much controversy about how much power had concentrated in her. I happened to be in the room when she was talking to a group of people, and she said, "I'm the most important person in the room when Tony is meeting." And you just think, what, other than elected leaders? And I guess I wanted you to reflect on this idea that these people have a role in governing, but they spend so much of their time in politics, and it's something A.C. Grayling talks about, that we're not governing anymore, it's all politics. And I'm just really interested in that kind of, do you feel that these are unelected people, right? They have tremendous influence. There's obviously a concentration of power in P&C now, and it's not necessarily, in different versions of government you see the cabinet having more role, but did you have a sense of whether these people saw themselves as stepping into governing or being all about the politics?
I think they would say it was all about governing, but all of them kind of said a very important part of your job is the politics as well. Particularly, Ben Hubbard, Gillard's chief of staff, he had to manage like a minority government. Like hearing him talk about that and like having to invite the backbenchers in, like you're constantly having to have conversations. But why I really wanted Peter Credlin is, as you said, she was this unique example of where, like, I would say she was more powerful than Abbott. And a lot of people have said that. And she was taking meetings with ministers on behalf of Abbott and was kind of this de facto prime minister. I would have loved to have spoken to her for that reason, which I just think it's the only missing piece of the book that I'm still holding out for the podcast.
If anyone has a link in the room.
If anyone.
Hook us up.
I've reached a dead end.
Over here.
Hi. All of your interviewees are from our sort of democratic tradition. Did you think about going outside that area into Asia or other parts of Africa?
Totally. So I had really tried to widen it beyond, like, as you said, but the accessibility was just the issue. And that's why it'll be good having the podcast, because we can just have more time and won't have a book deadline to try and get those people over the line. But I think what's been helpful is getting the chiefs on staff on the record for this book, having their names linked to the project to try and get those other people. But yeah, like we even tried, a lot of people didn't know, like even Zelensky, his chief of staff is a former film producer who's now leading, a country at war. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of others that I really want to get, but yeah, totally agree. It would be amazing to hear those perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
The most fascinating staff member, who I think is a deputy chief of staff, for me at the moment is Stephen Miller, who I think is Trump's deputy chief of staff. Because you talk about Susie Wiles is chief of staff, but who's got the higher profile is Stephen Miller, and it's a nasty profile. And he seems to, I'm interested to know whether you think he reflects the thinking of the president, or if he's reflecting the thinking of the people that got him there in the first place. It just seems to me that he's the exception to the sorts of individuals you're speaking about that you interviewed. I think he'd be really fascinating if you could find out, to do a podcast with, if you would
do a podcast, yeah. Because honestly, I haven't even thought about that with that lens before, but you're totally right. Because Susie has also just been so invisible.
That's right. Whereas
and he has been so,
and not just him, but his wife.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, well, what's their ambition? What are their ultimate plans in American politics? And I just think it's really sinister. And I just wonder whether he reflects Trump or others.
Get him on your podcast.
I'll let you know, I'll try.
Yeah. It is, when we kind of think about all these wonderful measured people who are balancing out their leaders, but yes, I suppose there also are some unhinged kind of examples where you're like, oh, are they making it worse or making it better? What voice
even J.D. Vance.
Yeah, yeah. What voice are they offering in the room, and is that something we should all be a bit more aware of? And I mean, I think it is worrying that we're saying these people have more power than the elected representatives, but we don't control who gets in as chief of staff. So it is very good to be more aware of.
That's what's also so, like, it's an unelected role. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Do we have any final questions before we wrap up?
Can I ask another? Oh, yeah. Did they comment on the West Wing?
Yes, I asked all of them, did you watch The West Wing? They all have. And Jonathan Powell, Blair's chief of staff, he was like very private, like he never even gave the press a headshot, so they'd have to run like this mysterious shadow. But the Downing Street press team were like to him, you have to take the West Wing cast on a tour, but they're not going to put it in the press, like it's just a private thing. And he was kind of like, oh my God. So he had to take them on a tour, and then obviously the photo got leaked with him and Leo McGarry.
That's very cool. One down the back here, just.
As a follow-up to that, did any of them ever mention yes, Minister, yes, Prime Minister, which is
yes.
we know much better.
All of them had watched that too.
Oh, I love it.
And Veep.
Yeah, I was going to say, and did they say it was quite accurate?
So Kamala Harris's chief of staff was saying Veep is so accurate to the point where that they were going... Kamala was like having a day where she was like out and about and she wanted to get an ice cream, and they fully had to vet the family who run that ice cream shop, that they had paid their taxes on time, like that they hadn't broken the law. And then there are actual discussions around what flavour ice cream. Oh my God. Like that, which is like out of Veep.
Yeah, literally stuff that you're like, oh, they must be making that up. Surely, no, it's real. Any final questions? Oh, we have one more down here. And after this, Phoebe will be signing up the back. So definitely make sure you grab a copy of the book and ask her for more off-the-record stories.
Have you ever thought of Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's... I don't know whether he was chief of staff, but he was kind of...
Yeah, he was. So I definitely tried to get him. I also tried to get Theresa May's chief of staff, Fiona Hill. Yeah. Why Theresa May, sorry, just totally digressing from Boris. But Theresa May had co-chiefs of staff. She had two. And one of them had to take a bullet for the team, which was Fiona, and resign. So I had really wanted to explore what it was like being fired and having to take a bullet for the team as a chief of staff. And she's done one interview where she said she got fired at 8 a.m. and just went to a pub and got pissed. And we had locked in the interview, but she kept bailing a minute out every time.
She's at the pub.
And apparently I had spoken to someone else who had tried to interview her, and apparently she just bails a minute out of every interview, like just panics and...
Oh, poor thing. There's probably a lot to unpack there, but...
Traumatic time.
Yeah. And so obviously you made the shift from policy work into journalism and becoming a media mogul, essentially. Did writing the book make you want to... Like, would you ever consider going back into politics? Did it give you an itch?
Never as a chief of staff, but I do miss politics.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't do it. And that's why hearing them all talk about the toll that it has on your personal life as well. Like Jacinda's chief of staff shared a story where he had a rare Sunday off and he took his two young daughters to a birthday party and they jumped in the pool and started swimming, and he totally missed that milestone of them learning how to swim. And that for him was like a turning point.
They were young.
They were like 2 and 5 or something. Yeah. Kind of depressing.
Yeah,
but
it is depressing.
Yeah, highs and lows.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Phoebe. Does everyone want to give her a big hand?